Hello, Jessica. We're so excited to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Hi, Angela. It's good to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So before we dive in, can you kind of give our listeners a little bit of a background on who you are and what you do for this Career Day episode?
Yeah, definitely. My name is Jessica. I have taught in education for the last 8 years. I grew up in Sandy, Utah, and I love kids. I love people, very much a people person. I love being outdoors, anything outdoors or with animals. I'm there. I went to school at Brigham Young University for elementary education. And then I taught in Alpine District for a couple of years, and then in Canyons District for the last 6 years. And then this next year, I'll actually be working as an instructional coach. And so I'll be kind of training teachers and working more in that capacity.
Oh, that's awesome. And
Yeah.
yeah, so you've been elementary education level, and what grades primarily have you taught in the elementary?
I've had a little bit of experience with all of the grades K through 6. For part of my career, I worked as an English language development teacher. And so I would pull out all different grade levels and work with speakers where English was was not their native language. But as far as being in a regular setting classroom, I've taught mostly second and third grade.
Awesome. That's so cool. And so was teaching something you kind of like knew all along, when somebody asked you when you're like 10 years old, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Was like teacher always at the top of your list, or kind of tell us about that journey to teacherhood?
Yeah, no, it was actually never really on my list. Not that I didn't want to be a teacher, but I had so many other interests. So, I mean, as a little kid, I was like, the typical professional soccer player or veterinarian. And then as I started school and even up into college, I still had no idea what I wanted to do. There were so many subjects that fascinated me that I was like, how in the world is someone supposed to choose just one thing to do for the rest of their life? Like, that sounds like a bad idea. But when I fell in love with teaching, I actually took a year off of school. So I completed a year of university. I actually declared teaching as a major, but it wasn't my own idea. It was a friend at the time that was like, hey, you should go into teaching. And I thought, well, I have to declare a major. So like, sure, whatever. I'll put that down and then I'll figure it out. But after that year, a friend of mine told me about an opportunity to teach abroad in China. And it was volunteer, but you'd be working with kids of like a bunch of different ages. And their main method of teaching was play. So you kind of play with the kids, but you do everything in English. And then you'd have little like kind of rewards for them when they would repeat the English that you used or when they would start producing English on their own. Anyway, so I went and did that. I loved it so much. I went back for a second semester, and that's when I was like, okay, I can do teaching. Like this is awesome. So I came back, stuck with my major, finished up school, and then went into teaching.
That is so cool. I love that story. It's fascinating, the opportunities that are out there that we don't even always think about. Like, that's probably not something that had been on your radar. Like, hey, I could go over to China and do something like this, right? Like, that's so cool though. And how rewarding to see kids develop in that way and knowing that you played a part in that. That's super cool.
Thanks. Yeah, it was a really cool opportunity.
Cool. When you first got into teaching, was it what you thought it was going to be when you were going through school and preparing for it, or were you caught off guard by what your typical day was like?
Yes and no. I mean, there were some things that I definitely thought, okay, yeah, like this is what I thought it would be as far as kind of the daily lesson planning and just kind of, I guess, how lessons would roll. And I knew that assessment and all of that was a part of it as well. Something I didn't really expect was how much behavior management came into it. And I knew relationships were important, but I was like, oh my goodness, I never imagined how difficult it could be to build relationships with some of the kids I'm working with. And so that to me was probably, and I'm someone who I feel like has had enough experience with kids that I was like, okay, like this is something I think I can do well, but it still took a lot of practice and a lot of effort and a lot of work and study to be able to figure out the best ways to connect with each kid and to kind of develop meaningful relationships. So that was something that I thought would be super easy for me. And while it did come somewhat naturally, it was a lot more work than I thought.
And so as along those same lines, just for like our listeners who are maybe thinking of, hey, I want to be a teacher when I grow up, like part of getting that teaching degree and that certification is relationships, kind of like one of those classes you take about like communication and fostering relationships and things like that.
Yeah, and it's funny, I went to school with people who were great at the subjects they wanted to focus in. So they were, amazing at history or math or whatever it was. But there were people who did not love kids. And I thought, if you're going to be in education, you have to love kids. Like I think that's all that got me through some of the years was like, I adore these kids. And if you don't have that, honestly, part of me is like, you might want to look elsewhere. And it's like, you could probably develop that, but you've got to know that you need to develop it and you've got to work hard at it. Cause I'm not sure you can do it without.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially on the days when the kids are just grating on your nerves, right? And you're like, you're lucky, I love you.
Yeah.
That's too funny. What's your absolute favorite thing? Like you go in Monday morning to school, and like what is the thing that you look forward to the most? What do you love about your job?
I love just those moments that I can really connect with a kid. And then I think the best thing ever is just seeing a kid progress. And whether that's behaviorally, emotionally, mentally, whether it's they really understand how to read now or they really get math better, just seeing those light bulb moments or those transformations that happen over the course of a year is huge payoff for me. I'm like, that is totally why I'm here.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's kind of why Sarah and I do what we do as well. It's like, hey, you did this. Like, look at you go. Right.
It's so cool to see when that happens. And it's like, it gets you through the times that are hard where you're like, oh, like this is a tough field to be in, and it is. There's a lot of expectations on teachers and faculty and it's a hard job sometimes, but it's those moments where you're like, wow, like what we're doing is really making a difference, and seeing that is just such a huge payoff, and it just keeps you going.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a huge, huge reward.
Yes. And just to brag on Jessica here, she is really good at teaching because she won, teacher of the year for like, wasn't it the Alpine School District when you were there?
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it was pretty cool. I was like, hey, I know her. She's like awesome.
That's a huge accomplishment, I have to say. Congrats to you on that.
Thanks. It's like, well, hopefully I'm at least doing something right.
Yes, I think so. Getting an award like that is pretty awesome. And, especially like Sarah and I obviously are online based. And so you're in the classroom with the kids. You have that opportunity to really foster those relationships, which I think carries even more clout because you are seeing them day to day, right? Like they know they can count on you. And that's just kind of an awesome feeling. So kudos to you. And yeah. One question that just kind of escaped my brain. So let me think about it here. So we kind of talked about, the best parts of what you liked. Was there anything, or like, I guess, what's the hardest part of the job being a teacher? You kind of mentioned, figuring out relationships, building that there. There's all the assessments, lesson plans. Like how much time would you say is spent like in the classroom teaching the kids versus lesson planning, assessments, and kind of the back end type of stuff?
It's a ton of time outside of the classroom, which is difficult. And I think any teacher you talk to will probably tell you that like they just don't have enough time. I feel like that's always the complaint. It's like, what do you need? Time. So I think, yeah, especially early on in my career, I think there was a lot more time that I had to dedicate to like lesson planning and preparation and making sure I understood the curriculum. And so it meant a lot of early mornings, a lot of late work days, and a lot of weekend time put in. Gladly as I got a little bit more comfortable with either the curriculum or the school I was at grade level, even if you switch up grade levels, there's just some experience that comes that allows you to cut down on some of that time. There's things that you don't have to think quite as much about. Behavior management, hopefully you have good systems in place, that makes that easier. But one thing I do wish took less time, or I wish that I was better at, is all the data and assessment. Like, I think you talk a lot about the instruction in college and as you're early on in your career, but there's not a ton of great training given as far as assessment and using data. And that's something the schools try and support you with, as in professional development and things like that. But that's something that's really difficult. And that's something that I think could perhaps be a little bit more supported or taught a little bit better. That's something that for me is still a little bit of a struggle, making sure like, oh my gosh, I have all this data and now what the heck do I do with it? And making sure that you're like, that you know how to do that and that it's meaningful. So sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a question, but those are like some of my thoughts.
No, that's a struggle we can relate to very well. We're like, we have a lot of data, and what do we do with it? How can we utilize this the best to make sure that it's helping our students effectively, right? Because that's really a lot of education, is assessment and getting data and seeing how students are performing and how you can do better. And data coming out your ears, right?
It is. It's like when we were talking with, the gal, the advisor, right, with accreditation, talking about data. Like we just had these conversations, is even with accrediting bodies who are looking at schools, institutions, they find that across the nation, many schools, so not just teachers, but looking at like full districts and institutions, are data rich but information poor. So it's like you have the what, but you don't always have the so what. And that stuck with me. I was like, oh wow, yeah, we have a lot of data, but how are you aggregating that into something meaningful that you can then use to make decisions? That's a tough thing. And I'm right there with you. I think there needs to be more training on that on all levels.
Yeah.
Well,
and like you said, it kind of goes back to the time, right? Okay, I have to teach these kids, I have to do this, and then I have to analyze data. Like, when is that going to fit in when your priority is the student and teaching the students, right? And so it's kind of a hobgob of crazy sometimes.
Yeah, it's like one of those things that's not on your immediate radar. And so it just decides so easily because you're like, I just don't have time. Like, this is something I know I need to do, but A, I don't know how to do it. B, figuring it out is going to take hours and hours and hours that I just don't have.
Yeah, for sure. So for those listeners, parents, students who wonder, what does a teacher do all day? Well, there's lots of things, right? So if you're listening thinking, I want to be a teacher, maybe if you're good at data, hey, that's a bonus point in your category for being a good teacher.
Totally.
To your team. So what would your advice be, Jessica, for someone who is maybe interested in this career field? If they're like a high school student listening in thinking, I want to be a teacher one day.
I think the more time you can get in classrooms, the better, because I feel like that's the only way you really get a feel for what you're going to be doing. So as far as looking at colleges and programs, I would say try to find one that is as hands-on as possible. Look for people now who are teachers and say, hey, can I just come spend time even observing in your classroom or volunteering or helping out? But I just think the more time you can get in classrooms, the better.
Yeah, that's awesome. And another question that we always like to ask our guests, just because it's kind of fun to reflect back, is that if you were able to kind of go back to your high school self and give yourself any piece of advice, what would you say to yourself?
This probably sounds super random. It's like, it's tied to teaching, but also just being a poor college student. I guess there's two things, and they might seem like counterintuitive, but one of them would be like, go out and have all of the cool experiences you can. Like, And in college and in high school, like if you get experiences to travel, to see other cultures, to learn other languages, or just experience other things, like do it, because you have the rest of your life to work. So there is no rush to hurry and get through school and jump into a career. Like you've got time. And then my other piece of advice to myself, which again might sound counterintuitive, is to like be smart with your money. Like for me, it's not like I was irresponsible or anything like that. But looking back, I'm like, man, I could have, like, if I could have found a way to do college debt free, and I probably could have, like, I should have done it. And so things like that, like I guess be willing to splurge on the experiences that are worth it and that are meaningful. But also be smart. And especially if you're going into teaching, like it's pretty well known, we're not exactly making a ton of money. So
No, I don't think it's completely counterintuitive, because being smart with your money doesn't mean not spending any of it. Like,
yeah,
to your last point, is just be careful where you're spending your money. If you're going to spend it on something that's meaningful, by all means, right? If that's investing into your future by getting more valuable experiences versus blowing every single week's paycheck from your summer job on makeup and junk food and all these things that it's like, okay, you could have been a little more careful with some of that. So there's a difference there for sure. So I'm with you. I got you, Jessica. I'm following you.
okay, you got me.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I can relate to that experience, because when it was I found out my senior year of high school that a group, like a teacher, was being a chaperone for a tour in the summer of like Australia, New Zealand, and Hawaii. And I'd always wanted to go to Australia. And I was like, oh my gosh, that would be so amazing. Like it would be right after I graduate high school. I could have this grand adventure. But the part of me that was like the responsible, smart saver was like, oh, but that's a lot of money. And I'm getting ready to go to college and I could use it at college. And so kind of had this like inner battle with myself of like, is the experience worth it? Or should I save it for college? And, I talked to my parents and they were kind of like, well, you probably should save it for college, but also like, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. So take it and go. So
Yeah.
I remember I saved like every cent that I could from my summer job. I paid for the whole thing myself. And then I got to college and it worked out, right? Because I worked extra hours and I did the things to make it happen. And so, yeah, to Sarah's point, like, I don't think it's counterintuitive. It is just be smart about your money, right? Like, I couldn't go and splurge on, hey, I want to buy 5 books this week, or I'm going to go to Starbucks to get a drink. Like, you just can't do that, right? Because you have a bigger goal. So,
yeah, totally.
I have a question just relating to, before we switch topics, but just relating to that, the widely known fact that many teachers are not rich, like they're not making maybe the income that they deserve. Was that a turnoff for you when you were deciding to go into the field, or did the joy of what you were going to be doing in that field just counteract anything that was related to the financial side for you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it a little bit and I was like, this may be less than ideal, but I knew for me personally that I had to be doing something that was meaningful. I was like, I could go into a job that makes a lot more money, but honestly, I think I would be miserable. And so for me, it was like, I can kind of make the money thing work. You know what I mean? Like I may not be rich, but like, I'll be all right. But knowing that I'm doing something that I'm passionate about was like, that was where it was at for me. So that was enough to be like, okay, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I love that too, because I think too often we get caught up in no, you have to have a good job that pays a lot. And it's like, but why? Right? Like I get that you spend a lot of your time working. So because you're spending so much time working, it should be something that you enjoy doing. Otherwise, you wake up hating life. And is it really worth it to have, the extra $60,000 a year or whatever the difference might be, to just hate life? Right?
Yeah, I'm like,
and I've seen that.
Passionate about something that makes a lot of money. And I'm like, props to you.
Right.
Yeah,
that's a win.
Seriously. Yeah, I'm on the same page with you, Jessica. I'm like, you know what? I could probably find a job that I'm making a lot more, but would I be hating life and just being like dreading it? And that's not fun, because I have had some of those jobs where I wake up and I'm like, oh, I have to go to work again. Like, this is awful.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no,
So,
to your point though, Jessica, it's true. Like teaching might not be for everybody. So just like any other job, you have to figure out what it is that you will enjoy and what your passions are. We just had somebody on the podcast in the financial services industry.
Cool.
Lucky for people who are in that industry, like if that is your passion, if you love money and finance, you're probably going to be doing okay, because there are some really great careers when it comes to income and something like that. But not everybody's passionate about that. And
Yeah.
it wouldn't be worth it. The money would not be worth it if you wake up and you're like, gosh, my job sucks. This is not fun, right? Like you have to find that balance and pursue something you're passionate about, and you'll make whatever it is, you'll make the money part work out. So
Yeah, definitely.
yeah.
I guess
Awesome.
sorry, one more note to that, if there are like any prospective teachers out there, there are ways, like it's hard, but if you are willing to continue your education and get higher degrees or take other courses, like you can also improve that income. So while it's notoriously a low paid job, there are ways to increase your income, and it's very doable. So I don't want anyone to think like I can't do it because of the money.
right.
Yeah.
No,
For sure.
that's fair.
Yeah,
Especially
that's good.
special ed teachers, right? Like there are a lot of very needed positions that, if you take the time to get endorsed in certain ways, or pursue that higher education, definitely opportunities out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for
Well,
sure.
and so that brought up another question for me, because at the beginning you mentioned that this next year you're transitioning into training teachers. And so was that like an extra certification or kind of just a promotion, or what does that look like to transition to where you're headed now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it partly depends on the district. Some districts require a higher degree. The district I'm with, I will have to receive kind of additional certification during my first year in that position. Part of my motivation though for going that direction is that I've always wanted to work in more of a administrative position. And so I've always eventually had the goal of becoming a principal. And this is kind of a stepping stone in that direction. But yeah, it's something where I feel like I can just have a greater impact on more students, hopefully. And so it's kind of just broadening that scope a little bit.
I love that. That's awesome. And yeah, so and I don't know if we kind of touched on this. So you mentioned there's an opportunity for like advanced degrees to further your career, but just to become a basic elementary, teacher, it's just a 4-year degree, right? Like tell us a little bit about what your education path looked like for that.
Yeah, so it was just a 4-year bachelor degree. Part of my degree was, well, I got an endorsement as in teaching English as a second language was what it was called at the time. But I know a lot of those, what used to be those endorsements, are included in a lot of those 4-year degrees now. So that may come with some additional, I guess, kind of endorsement. But yeah, so just my 4-year bachelor degree was all I needed to get rolling. If you are looking into more administrative positions, likely you'll want a master's in the future. But I mean, if you just want to stay and teach in the classroom, you're good to go.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I always like to ask that question because, I think sometimes in career planning, that's overlooked, right? Like, oh, I'm just going to get my bachelor's and then I'm good to go. But sometimes it does require that next level of, actually, it's an additional 2 to 5 years, depending on, what route you want to take. And so I think that's just a good caveat for any prospective students who maybe want to be a teacher to know. But yeah, we want to be respectful of your time, Jessica. And so before we let you go, is there any other words of wisdom or nuggets that you would want to share with a student who's maybe looking into teaching as a career?
I don't know. I would just say, I mean, this sounds so cheesy, but it's like follow your heart, right? Like we've talked about it, but do what you're passionate about, find what you love, and the rest, like you can make it work. But I love this. I love this podcast. I love that there's so many resources out there for you to consult and to look at and talk to be able to decide kind of what's best for you and what the best pathway is to get there.
Yeah, awesome. And I just thought of one more question before I let you go. So I remember like as a kid, I would always be like, ooh, teaching sounds fun because like you get summers off, right? Like you don't have to work in the summers, but realistically, like tell us what that looks like for a teacher in those like off months, because I'm sure there's a lot going on behind the scenes that maybe even just the general public is not aware of. So yeah, what does a summer look like for a teacher?
Yeah, I guess I would say, first of all, I know some teachers who I think originally went into it with that mindset and they are not super happy individuals. So like if that is your reason for doing teaching, like don't do it. And then as far as what a summer looks like, it honestly, they're getting shorter and shorter. I feel like the school year is expanding. So it's looking more and more like closer to a 2-month summer. And yeah, a lot of that summer for a lot of teachers, a good deal of time is spent prepping for the next year, getting your classroom ready, clearing out your classroom, going through all the paperwork you have, lesson planning, meeting with your team. So, and there's like professional development thrown in there before your official start date as well. So yeah, the whole summer's off thing. And it's like, yes, you definitely get some time off, like way more than most, most full-time people during the summer. But it's not all it might seem. So be aware of that. That's a good thing to
Yeah.
know.
Yes.
Yeah,
fair.
that's kind of what I figured. That's why I was like, let's just ask that question, because I think some of our listeners might be thinking, sweet, I get 3 months off and I only have to work 9 months of the year. But really, there's a lot of prep work and all that stuff. So
I also know teachers that, the administrators are like, hey, we need somebody for summer school, hint, hint, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
sometimes you get roped into summer school, even if it's maybe not your first choice. And that usually lasts quite a few weeks, doesn't it, into the summer?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good chunk of time. I've done that before too. And I was kind of like, oh, didn't love it.
Especially since most of the kids, it's like, it's their summer and they might not have the same enthusiasm as they had throughout
Yeah.
the rest of the year.
Yep, totally.
yeah, so true. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jessica, and giving us a look inside what a classroom teacher does and the path and the education for that. And yeah, so those listeners, let us know what you thought of today's episode. If you want to be a teacher, we can share some resources too of just career type things. Maybe you can check your strengths and see if it's something that would be good for you. But yeah, join us next week, and thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Jessica.
Yes,
See you guys.